I'm here with Mako Fujimura. Mako is a leading contemporary artist whose process-driven, refractive, slow art has been described by David Brooks of the New York Times as a small rebellion against the quickening of time. Mako is also an arts advocate, a writer, a speaker who's recognized worldwide as a cultural influencer. His art is displayed in way too many prominent places for me to mention. It really, quite an impressive career he has as an artist, but I know Mako better as a writer, and he's written several really important books. One of them is called Culture Care, which I think is a groundbreaking look at the world through the lens of care as opposed to culture war. And another really important book called Silence and Beauty that he and I have talked about several times in the past. Mako's also been a speaker at several of our conferences and done plenty of interviews with me already, so I really appreciate him coming back to be with us today as we lead up to this election.
It's great to be here, Brian. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Mako. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you and talk about important issues. So to start with, we've got an election coming up less than 3 months, I think.
Yes. Let's hope so.
Let's hope so, exactly. Good point. So I just would like to first start getting your sense of your overall state of the country right now.
Yeah, when the current president, President Trump, got the Republican nomination, I tweeted, which upset some of my friends, some of my conservative friends. As you know, I was appointed by President Bush, George W. Bush, to be on the National Council, and I served on that. It's a presidential appointed position, so you get to work with the White House directly, and as an advocate, arts advocate, and as a volunteer. But so I am kind of an insider, being now thinking of myself completely marginalized by what was happening on the Republican side, on the conservative movement. Many of my friends have left the party since then. The people that I worked with in Washington, in humanities and the arts. And I am kind of in limbo. I have said very early that I cannot support Mr. Trump for presidency. So now that he's the President Trump, I want to honor the office, but I struggle to know where I stand. Meanwhile, I still believe in the bedrocks of conservative principles, and in some ways that has been accentuated by what values I hold, right? And yet this pro-life position of caring for the unborn and caring for people who have no voice, caring for soldiers who come back from wars, caring for mothers, single mothers who cannot afford to pay rent. All these principles still I abide by, and there's a social side of that, there's an economic side of that, and there's all sorts of things that are being upended right now, which is a great thing. And I don't hold any position to be sacred in that sense. I do have some sacred principles, but those political conversations have to be part of the pragmatic realities of the time that we live in. There are always compromises. There are always things that you disagree with, and that's part of what we're talking about. So given that, I tweeted that this nomination is the result of many years of culture wars. Mr. Trump, I said, is the Godzilla coming out of the culture wars battlefield. And he's going to destroy many things, whether he intends or not. And we better get ready. And of course, my friends were upset with that statement. But it seems pretty true now. And indeed that whether he intends that or not, he came in with a certain mandate, a mandate which he has carried out right? And so this assault against any kind of marginal realities, to prefer options of relying on the gigantic machinery of especially capitalism, the type of capitalism that is Darwinian, is becoming reality. So on the other hand, what we're seeing in society, from what we have experienced with these marches, to that, I mean, that's a pro-life position, you must say. You're marching for life, right? Black Lives Matter, or whoever's life you're marching for. And so that position to me has shifted from the battlegrounds, let's say, of who gets nominated for Supreme Court, to the streets of all over the world, people marching for human dignity and human rights. And that cannot be a bad thing. Now, people may argue that, well, it has been hijacked by politics and so forth, liberal politics. But that's not the point. It's always been that way. Whether if you're pro-life like I am, let's say marching for unborn, it is the same exact principle why I would choose to march in Black Lives Matter march in Brooklyn. I would do that because I believe in sanctity of life. And I believe that argument has not been spelled out, perhaps. So I have no idea what my political stripe is now. I have no idea who I will vote for. I struggle certainly both sides. I stand with my brother, Cornel West, who has scathing criticism of the liberal democratic wing, and saying that you cannot be serious about some of the reality, some of the positions that you have taken even in recent times, that promotes culture war, fights in a way that is accentuating the differences and accentuating the divides. And we have an opportunity in these times, and especially with this pandemic that has, my friend said 2020 is 2020. It has given us clarity of vision. It has given us this view that we have not had even as a citizen of the world. There's no one on this earth who is alive now who is not affected by coronavirus in some way. Everybody is affected, and therefore that is a 2020 vision that we can have toward compassion, towards serving each other, understanding that somebody in Bangladesh is exactly the same struggles, having issues as far as this pandemic is concerned as we are. It doesn't matter if you're wealthy. It doesn't matter if you're homeless. It is the virus strikes all people. So what is that opportunity? And I have been thinking a lot about that, and how we might, as brothers and sisters, marching in the same march, let's say, for a world that is more fair, world that is more beautiful, the world that we are proud to hand off to the next generation. This stewardship of nature and culture at the same time is paramount to not just, so it's not just a nice idea. When Culture Care book came out, people say, well, I can't disagree with that, but how are you going to make this happen? And it's nice to care for artists, but that's like, who cares, basically, like, and I began to think that, the world may think that, but as I said, things can happen, come out of culture wars, in a battleground in which no one wins. And because if you win culture war battle, you lose. You certainly lose your territory by doing it, by, demonizing the other side. but you poison the very ground that you're standing on. So you know your children don't have a place to stay anymore. They will run away from that. So you lose the next generation. So if we win, we lose. So why are we doing this? You know, but at the same time, there's danger, literal danger. A scholar from Pakistan came up to me in one of my early cultural care conversations. This was in 2011 or 2012. And with tears in her eyes, she said, you speak about cultural care in your nation as a defense against, you know, dehumanized conditions. In my country, it will literally, culture wars will literally lead to real wars. And I sat there in the audience thinking culture care is absolutely essential for survival of humanity, period. And now we look at the world and see the fractures that led to so many, you know, monumental impact to communities, to lives. We have to agree with her that unless we can practice culture care, we will not survive this.
Well, at least, you know, I mean, my sense, unfortunately, is that since the time when you wrote your book, things have gotten worse.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, there's less, you know, you mentioned, you know, somebody asked you, well, does anybody care, right, about culture care? Does anybody care about common good?
Yes.
Right? I mean, it seems to be less and less the case as the polarization increases.
Yes. And, you know, that's, you could have predicted that by, you know, the rise of now President Trump.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been very clear that that's happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, you know, thinking back to your book and, you know, what you've experienced since then, I mean, what ways have you found to be most effective at communicating across the divide, so to speak?
So, oddly, as you know, you're absolutely right that we're much worse off right now. You know, gradually we have came down a notch, 2 or 3 or 4. But at the same time, I think people's awareness has increased. I mean, this whole march, you know, this whole way that we are resisting whatever we're resisting, we're doing together, right? So that seems to indicate that there's a new awareness. And as, you know, as Cornel West has mentioned, this is different than other marches because this is people of other nations, people of other colors, people who are usually very resistant to march with us. They're marching with us. And I think that's serious in a way that I think about openness that this time has given. Perhaps because of the slowdown, we have more time to reflect. We have more time to think about mortality. We have more time to think and value community and family and so forth. So that has opened the door for, you know, so we started this thing called the Kintsugi Academy just before the shutdown, which is to take the venerable tradition of Kintsugi, mending broken ceramics with Japan lacquer and gold. Therefore, the resulting mended bowl is more valuable than the original, more beautiful and valuable than the original. You know, that whole idea seemed very much prophetic to me. So we started this thing. Since we're on video, I can show you. I've been designing these boxes for Kintsugi, and the Kintsugi master in Japan has been working with me to create these beautiful, this is a 400-year-old tea bowl.
Wow.
That fractured, and then there's this gold mended with Japan lacquer. And what is resulting is now this board is more valuable than the original, but it's also beautiful.
It really is beautiful.
Kintsugi master doesn't hide the fractures, right? He creates a river of gold, tree of gold, a very generative image.
Yeah, beautiful.
And so, and he not only does Kintsugi, he has developed a technique so that anybody can practice Kintsugi in a traditional form. Japan lacquer is notoriously difficult to use, and it's like poison ivy,
Mm,
so people are allergic to it.
mm.
So he has developed with a fishing rod company this new urushi Japan lacquer based on cashew nuts. So as far as we've tested this in various people, including people who are allergic to nuts, and they seem okay because it doesn't get into the air. So, children can practice this with us. And instead of just fixing something, you can mend to make new. And that's a metaphor for our time, right? And we need a metaphor to move forward, not just to get back to normal.
Yeah. Well,
We're
normal.
not going to have normal.
Well, normal wasn't so good in a lot of ways, right?
And normal wasn't so good to some people. Yes,
Yeah,
that's what we're discovering. So,
particularly, as it
yes.
relates to racism.
So how do we deal with the fractures? And when I started Kintsugi Academy with Nakamura-san, I was hoping that this would lead to culture care, and it certainly does. But now, like we think this is essential for human beings to do this, to practice, because this is like generative thinking. So, once you do, we give you a kit and you kind of take something that's broken, whether it be, ceramics or toys or whatever that you want to work on, right? But once you go through the process, first of all, you have to slow down to do it. It takes at least 2 hours for you to sand something down so that you can put gold on it. It slows you down, and also you start to identify the fracture as your own, right? And it could be something that you've done to make to fracture the ball, but it could be something that's done to you. And so you begin to process this as a writers do with words. They're mending fragmented pieces back together, and then they're pouring gold into the fragmented areas of fissures, so that literally it is again, it is not hidden, or it's not fixed in a way that's made back to normal, but it is creating something new, right? So we need that metaphor today more than ever. We need everybody to be thinking this way, because it's part of recovery from trauma, right? Trauma counselors have come to us in these workshop initially when we were able to gather, and they said, this is first 6 months with a client, I spent that, trying to convince the client that you cannot fix your trauma. And once that is understood and felt, then the work can begin. But there's this resistance against, this kind of Western perfectionism, industrial perfectionism, that we can fix something and we can make it back to whatever it was in perfected state, and we can move on. Well, that's not going to happen to human beings. Trauma counselors can tell you that. And if you've been through trauma, that that's true. So we need ways to get to the other side. And these therapists said Kintsugi is a perfect way to do this, because you have to use your hands. First of all, we have over-rationalized. So, that's why culture wars begin, right? Is because we think, this ideological principle and this ideological principle cannot match. So we have to fight for this, whatever I hold. Well, that's not true, but that's how mind works. Mind is, creates categories, and then writers know this, right? Your words are basically categorical definitions.
We want everything to be black and white. We
That's
can't
right,
handle the
and
gray.
the clarity demands that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But as human beings, we know that starts to break down. For instance, if an engineer falls in love with an artist, The engineer cannot be black and white, right? Has to think in color, right?
Exactly.
So, right. So those principles we know in life to be true. If you have it doesn't matter if you a plumber, giving birth to a scientist, I mean, if you love your child, you have to change how you view your categories, your words, your assessments. So that needs to happen, but we don't know how to do it. Actually, Kintsugi actually helps you to do that if you can mend something slowly and then put it back, but do it in a way that you have to use your imagination to move beyond what you think is perfected state. And so that opens up a whole bunch of doors for community, for individual therapy, you name it, right? So Brian, I have been doing remote workshops, Kintsugi workshop. We send them a kit. We started to test this about a month ago. I develop a series of videos where they can go through, but I also do one-to-one coaching and trying to develop leaders so they can do this, with a group. I have never seen anything like this where, even remotely, things start to happen in the participants' lives almost immediately as they are working. What happens is working with hands releases your kind of reductivist sense of your rational side. Right, it disarms you because you are focused on something, and plus you're mending something. Now, if the bowl happens to be, or the cup happens to be something very special to you, this cup belonged to my grandmother, and when I was carrying it from my, Texas home to New Jersey, it broke, and I was really sad. And when I heard about Kintsugi, I said, oh my goodness, I can, mend this to make new. Keep my grandmother's memory alive by honoring her. And then, as this person's working on it, she thinks, oh my goodness, this is not just about my grandmother, it's about me. It's about my fracture. And all of a sudden you open up this whole new avenue for conversation, for, and if the person is an artist, it's like, if the person is a photographer, then that immediately goes into their photography. They're sending me these images. I can't see the world without fractures anymore. And by the way, when I drop something and break it, I'm excited. Like before I used to throw it away. Yeah, now I'm like, now I can think wow, back I have to keep this.
Many things like that I've probably thrown away.
Yeah,
and, I should not have.
So to answer your question, I mean, I think this is a time when things open up like this, and I've never seen so much open reactions as I do today.
Well, I'll take a look on your website and try.
Yeah. You can follow us on Kintsugi. It's Academy Kintsugi on Instagram and Twitter. But if you look up Kintsugi Academy, I'm sure it'll come up, and we'll be starting real workshops in the fall. We're trying to get the kits ready because I think there's going to be a huge demand for this. And
it's KENS
KIN TSUGI. Kintsugi. Yeah, kin is gold in Japanese. Tsugi means to mend, but tsugi also means beautifully. Tsugi also means generational connection.
Wow.
And Kintsugi master, it came out of tea ceremony tradition. And the families of tea masters, let's say something will break, something important will break in an earthquake. They will oftentimes keep the fragments for several generations before they give it to a Kintsugi master, because they believe that such a fracture is meaningful and it is something that is to be honored. And fractures need to be something that families behold for generations. So Kintsugi is also passing on that generational sense of belonging and connecting. And then ultimately, several generations after, they would give the broken ceramic to a Kintsugi master, and they mend it with gold. I brought a 17th century bowl that was used in a ceremony around that time. Later on fractured, families kept it for 2 generations, and Kintsugi master mended it with gold, beautiful. And I brought it to Columbine High School for their 20th
Wow.
memorial, and
cool.
didn't expect that this will communicate other than symbolic. Families who held the bowl, literally the tears are inside the bowl now, because the senses, right? When you hold something or when you're mending something with your hands, that does something to us that we can't really explain. There's a communion, right? It's like a communion cup. You hold it and you pass it on. There's that sense in this tea bowl. And when you realize that the tea master's family that been through fractures and traumas held on to this for many years, and Kintsugi, ceramic survived the war, survived Hiroshima and Nagasaki, survived all these tragedies of our time. And now you're holding it with your own trauma and with your own loss. There's something that is deeply universal about that, and I was blown away. I was really just taken aback by the reaction of the parents and siblings of the victims at Columbine.
Well, I'm sure glad you were able to share that with them. Right? That had to have been quite.
It's at Columbine High School now. It's sitting on the.
Is it really?
Yeah,
oh, wonderful!
Yeah,
wow.
I gave it to them with the permission of the T family. Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, they'll stay there to, nourish people for, years to come now.
Well, it's a metaphor that literally, Columbine is Kintsugi. That's what I came away from. The families, even the families of the perpetrators, they still live in Littleton.
Wow.
It's just amazing. Like, how could that be, right? And this is not without contention. I mean, there's been a lot of debate about this, but the family of the perpetrators feel that they're safest in Columbine.
Wow.
Because of the community. And I've gotten to know a youth pastor who has served the students for a long time, and the way he tells these stories, it's just incredible what has come out of that time. The community stayed together and they mended, knowing the fracture. So it's a Kintsugi story.
Wow. So what suggestions do you have for religious leaders, and how they should be leading through the election?
Well, first of all, I want to say that it's very hard to be a pastor today. I have many pastor friends who are really struggling, and I want to just address that right up in front, because we need to care for our shepherds now, today. And we may not think of that, we're just, doing Zoom worship. And well, imagine a person who is, gifted in creating community that can't even hug a person. Imagine a person who is pastoral and wants to be along his congregation. That's why he or she became a pastor. Today can't do that. So we need to be aware that these people who are gifted to serve and shepherd us are, in need of our help. The other thing I would say is this movement, right? We notice sociologically that the younger generation is not joining the church or leaving the church in droves, and there's an entire community of these young people who still believe in God, but they don't think the institution of the church has represented God well. And they're right. I mean, we've been fighting culture wars. So they look at that and say, what are you doing? Like, and, I always say, when people are a little bit skeptical about, in the church about culture care, right? Well, they say, well, we have to defend our territory. I said, that's fine. There are things to be defended. And I'm not a pacifist, okay? I will defend, what I, believe. But think about this. all of the years, right? You've been through, I'm sure, multiple discipleship programs, and I have been through probably all of them, right? I mean, just think about it: parachurch, church, right? And all the spiritual formation groups, all the discipleship, cell group, planting churches, all of that I've done. Now, if you ask me, right, in the 70s when these programs came out and said, discipleship program is to grow the fruit of the Spirit in your life, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control, right? All these principles. And we agree. Yes, it says that's what we want in our lives. We want to be filled with love, right? We want to grow ourselves. That's the goal of discipleship. So the question is often asked, so how are you doing, right? What is your New Year resolution to work on one of the fruit of the Spirit? Well, actually, it's only one, love. But, let's say you struggle with self-control, you want to work on that, right? Well, that's fine. We've done that, probably all of us. But how is that translated into a culture? Right? That's the question I ask. I say, do you see the fruit of the Spirit in any way? I mean, it doesn't matter. It's outside of church or inside of church. Where do you see the fruit of the Spirit? Where do you see love? Where do you see joy? Where do you see peace? Where do you see kindness? Where do you see gentleness? And the younger generation looks at the established, let's say the church leadership or whatever, which is fast changing, but nevertheless, they don't see the fruit. So they're right, they should leave, right?
Yeah.
And
they're calling
because
out
we've been fighting culture wars, and it has not resulted, maybe individual fruit, but certainly not community fruit. Now, there are exceptions, thankfully. Right, so we look at those. Columbine would be one of them that I would mention. There are congregations, there are places that has practiced this over and over. African American communities, right? They're Hispanic communities. There are even some even some mega churches have done some of this better than others, right? So we need to understand that God's Spirit is still operating. But when I see what's happening in the world, and when I ask myself that question, where's the fruit of the Spirit operating in the world? Because that's what the Spirit is, right? It doesn't matter how many times we put label Christian, something, Christian church, Christian plumbing. It doesn't mean that the Spirit is going to come, right? I mean, that we really have to, right. We have to understand, like, that's not what the Spirit is after. Spirit is after transparency, authenticity. Spirit is after community. Spirit is, trying to find a heart that wants to honor God, even if that person doesn't know God. Right, so that is operating, floating outside of a conventional institutional system. And when we see the abuses of the church, when we see the fractures of the church, churches fighting culture wars, leading people into even danger, not just spiritual but physical danger. That really indicates to me that we really have to rethink what the church is and what this new wineskin that the Holy Spirit is creating, that we are unaware of. The Holy Spirit doesn't stop working. In fact, I think the Spirit is active more so visibly today because of the pandemic, because of all the unrest, because of the uncertainties. And there are more saints praying today than a year ago. I can assure you of that. I think we're more in touch with the Spirit. I think we have, but these are not coming necessarily from the power basis. These are coming from grassroots. These are coming from artists, writers, people who have been marginalized in the past, people who don't necessarily belong to, conventional institutional structures. And I think God is using those people to bring Spirit-filled prayer into the world.
Well, I think you really it's a really good point about how the Spirit is working through younger people, and thank goodness for that.
Yeah, amen.
And how it's working through our entire culture to come to a reckoning finally.
Yes.
On the racism that's been
Yes.
systemic in different forms for centuries.
Yeah.
So I think those are really great observations, and thank you for bringing those, to our forefront. So just to finish up, if you had one thing to hope for, one outcome from the election, what would you like to see?
Right, that we get more involved. I don't think, whether you're voting for somebody that is in itself a solution to the issues that we need to be working on. With one thing I think we have seen, which is positive, is that democracy works, that it is a set of accountability that prevents against dictatorial pressure. Now, there are ways of getting around that, and of seeing how that is being done. But also this apathy and this disengagement that most of us have had in politics for a very long time is we also accounted for, right? That is like, okay, so do you really, what is it that you want? Do you want to make a difference in the world? And do you want to make an impact? Well, it's not just going to vote. That's the first step, but it's being involved in local politics and school boards and serving on church, vestry and elders boards and working for nonprofits and helping your company become more ethical and all these things count toward a better way of creating the fruit of the Spirit in culture. I think that's for sure. One thing that I'm hopeful for is that people have woken up to say, enough is enough. I don't know what I can do, but I'm going to do something, today. And certainly I'm going to raise the next generation to desire that, to sacrifice for that, to move towards something that is greater than their own success. Right, and that's a great thing for people in our generation. Like we've been sleep at the wheel, basically, as far as trying to, enact even the principles that we agree with, that we teach. So it's time to change. It's time to begin a new journey. I'm hopeful that Kintsugi can happen, even in political systems, that even in the Republican Party, even in the Democratic Party, even in libertarians, even whatever, socialists or whatever, that everybody is not practicing their principles. What I mean is, if you're a Republican, you're defending things that you never thought you would have to defend. If you're a Democrat, you're trying to do things that you thought, at one point was against your principles, right? It doesn't matter what stripe you are. So let's get back to our first loves. Let's get back to the principles of governance and principles of democracy that we are proud to uphold, and reconfigure. And it's okay to disagree, right? It's okay to have multiple parties, which, by the way, may be a way forward, is not to see as two-party system, because that makes it impossible for somebody like me to participate. There has to be a better way of doing this. But regardless of that, I think that way forward is to look at the fractures and look at the principles that you are standing on and see how far off you have left your first love, and get back to it, and don't label it, create something as artists do, we have to see something beautiful in the cracks. We have to acknowledge the fracture, and we have to behold the fragments and say, this is beautiful in itself. And if we can get to a point where we say, I don't think I can fix this, right? Like trauma, I don't think, but I can work the mend and make it more beautiful. That's when things can move. And so I'm hopeful that more and more people are at least gaining a vision for that. And I'm hopeful that Kintsugi Academy can help that bridge.
Well, Mako, as always, it's really been fun to talk with you. And one of the things that I enjoy so much in our conversations is that, the insight and the stepping back perspective that you provide is quite frankly, so different than what, the typical conversations that I have. And I really love to hear what you have to say on these different topics. So I think it's very insightful. I think it's very helpful for where we're at right now. And so I just want to thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's good to be part of this journey with you to provide compassion into the world.
Yes. So we'll be back in touch, after the election.
Definitely.
Good for us.
Oh, by the way, my new book comes out next January, so we should do a.
Oh, definitely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's do
Theology of Making at a Yale Press. It's called Art and Faith: A Theology of Making.
Oh, good. No, we'll do definitely a book launch interview.
Okay.
For sure.
That's awesome.
But I'm also planning to do another series of interviews after the election.
Yes.
With some of the same folks that I'm talking to before the election, just to see, okay, whatever happened is done now. What do we do next? So.
Yep.
So anyway,
Kintsugi time.
exactly. So yeah, you can give us some advice from that perspective once we get to that point.
I'll try. Yeah.
All right, Mako. Thank you so much.
Good
it's a pleasure as always.
Okay. Yes. Bless you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.